She thought her husband died in a boating accident. 7 years later, she sees his face in a tourist photo online. Please, help me get to 1,000 subscribers. And write the title of a book everyone should read in the comments. The morning air had tasted like pine and sun. It was their anniversary, 7 years of marriage, quiet and steady. The kind that didn't need grand gestures or declarations. Just shared coffee, early morning silences, and a comfortable, lived-in kind of love. They had rented a little A-frame cabin on Lake Chelan. Lucas had found it online. Off the grid, he'd said, tapping the screen with that boyish grin. No reception, no deadlines, no emails. Just us. Ellison had laughed. Sounds like a horror movie. But wasn't. At least not at first. The cabin stood on a slope overlooking the water, all wood and glass and shadows. The lake shimmered like brushed metal, calm and endless. In the distance, the trees swayed with a hush that felt like reverence. They unpacked slowly, deliberately, as if stretching the time. She made coffee while he fussed with the fishing gear he'd insisted on bringing. They'd spent the morning wrapped in the ordinary. Eggs, burnt toast, a half-finished crossword. I'm going to try the cove, Lucas said, slinging the old tackle box under one arm. Be back before lunch. Ellison looked up from her book. Don't get eaten by a lake monster. Only if you promise to haunt me. That was the last thing he said. She remembered the way his silhouette cut across the dock, lean and tall, casting a long reflection over the glassy surface. The little rowboat rocked as he stepped in. Then he pushed off, oars creaking softly, vanishing into the morning mist like something imagined. At first, she wasn't worried. Lucas could lose hours out there, chasing trout in silence. She made lunch, waited, waited more. By late afternoon, the sun had started to fold behind the trees. No sound of oars, no sign of him. Panic crept in like cold water under a door. She called out, loud at first, then louder, then screaming. The echo came back empty. She found the rowboat half submerged near the rocky edge of the opposite shore. One or drifting nearby. Tackle scattered across the floor. No blood, no torn clothes, just absence. The sheriff arrived within an hour. Flashing lights disrupted the quiet, turning the lake into a mirror of red and blue. Search teams scoured the shoreline. Drones hovered. Divers plunged into the cold water, again and again. Nothing. Day bled into night. Then another. Then another. There's no sign of foul play, the officer had said, not meeting her eyes. We believe it was an accident. Currents can be unpredictable. Sometimes the lake doesn't give back. Ellison didn't cry. She remembered standing barefoot on the dock, hair tangled by the wind, watching the lake as if it owed her something, as if it might speak. But it didn't. It only reflected the sky, vast and hollow. 7 years had passed since that day. And still, the lake stayed silent. The new apartment was smaller, quieter. It sat on the 5th floor of a brick building in Capitol Hill, tucked between a florist shop and a vintage bookstore that never seemed to be open. From her window, Ellison could see the city lean into dusk. Headlights, rain-blurred crosswalks, the faint hum of streetcar wires. 7 years. People stopped counting after the third. They stopped asking, stopped looking concerned when her voice caught his name, stopped glancing at her left hand. She never remarried, never dated, really. Work had become the scaffolding that held her up. Interior design, clean lines, predictable light. It kept her busy, kept her mind organized, even when her heart wasn't. Clients liked her for her calmness, her ability to read the room, to find warmth where others saw cold. None of them knew that her own space remained untouched, still whites, still shadows, still silence. On her bookshelf sat a small wooden box. Inside, old photos, a postcard from Montana, the watch Lucas used to forget to wear, a flash drive she hadn't opened in years. That night, rain tapped against the window in steady rhythm. Ellison sat cross-legged on the rug, a half-finished glass of wine beside her, scrolling through pictures on her tablet. The digital folder was labeled Us. There they were, beach trips, blurry selfies, one photo of him holding up a fish with a grin, so wide it didn't seem fair. He'd hated photos, always squinting into the sun, always a little off frame. Her fingers paused on one from their last trip together, The cabin, the dock, the two of them wrapped in a blanket like teenagers. She could almost hear his laugh in that moment, dry and soft, and just for her. Let go. Her best friend Lila had told her earlier that week over coffee. You've waited long enough. You deserve to feel something again. But Ellison didn't know what let go meant anymore. She tried. Therapy, travel, even yoga, that had lasted 2 classes. But every now and then, in a song, a scent, a stranger's walk, something inside her twisted. Not grief, not even memory. Something more alive. Intuition. It was a quiet thing. Not urgent. Not loud. Just persistent. Like a breeze that moved the curtains, though the windows were closed. She set the tablet down and stood, arms crossed. Lucas would have told her she was being dramatic. Would have kissed the top of her head and said, "That imagination of yours will get us both in trouble." But what if it wasn't imagination? What if the silence wasn't the end of the story? The email was short. You'll love this house. Check out the 3rd photo. Total Ellison vibes. Whitewashed stone, soft light, rustic shutters. You'd redesign it in 5 seconds flat. Karen. Ellison clicked the link out of habit. Karen, her colleague at the firm, was always sending her architecture inspo, tree houses in Norway, villas in Santorini, minimalist bungalows in Joshua Tree. Most of them blurred together. But tonight, she welcomed the distraction. The blog loaded slowly. The title read, "1 Week in Portugal, Hidden Corners of Cascais." She sipped her tea, scrolling past photos of sunlit alleys and Azulejo tiles. Then came the house. Simple, sloped roof. Jasmine climbing the side like lace. She smiled. Karen was right. It was her kind of place. Unpolished, quiet, honest. She moved on to the next image. A wide shot of the house taken from across the plaza. And then her breath caught. There, in the lower right corner, half-shadowed beneath a patio umbrella, a man. He wasn't the focus of the shot. The photographer hadn't even noticed him, clearly. But Ellison did. Immediately. He was seated alone, hunched slightly over a book, a glass of something amber near his elbow. Sunglasses. Scruffy beard. A little older. But that jawline. That left-handed gesture with the thumb under the chin. That stillness. That shape. Her heart thudded like a fist against glass. No, it couldn't be. She leaned closer to the screen. Screenshot. Zoom. Enhance. The pixels broke slightly, but the image remained intact enough. He turned his head just slightly toward the camera, not looking at it, just caught. It was him. Lucas. Every instinct screamed it. But the mind, the logical part, the one trained to smooth out grief's illusions, began to push back. Faces can look alike, da. It's been 7 years, da. Grief has a way of finding ghosts in strangers. And then she saw the watch. His left wrist, resting on the table. Brown leather strap. Round face with a tiny crack between the 4 and the 5. She remembered teasing him about finally replacing it. "I'll replace it when you replace me," he'd said once, pulling her hand to his lips. The watch was the same. Exactly the same. She stared at the image for a long time. Not moving. Not blinking. Time folded in on itself. 7 years ago, she'd stood at the edge of a lake, listening to the stillness, waiting for the ripples to return her husband. They never did. Now he was here, on a patio, in sunlight. Alive? She didn't know whether she felt rage or awe or terror. Only one thought rang clear. If he was alive, then what had she been mourning all these years? "I'm telling you," Ellison whispered, holding out her tablet. "This isn't just someone who looks like him." Lila leaned in, squinting at the screen. They were sitting across from each other at their usual cafe, a place where conversations rarely outlive the coffee. Ellison tapped the Zoom icon. "Look, the way he sits, the way he holds a glass. That's Lucas." Lila stared at the image for a few seconds, then leaned back with a sigh and a soft smile. The kind people use when they're trying to be kind but don't believe a word of what you're saying. "Oh, well," she said gently. "That's not him. It's just someone who reminds you of him. And that's okay." "It's not okay. You've had dreams before. You've seen him in crowds. That's part of grief. It tricks you." Ellison's jaw tightened. "This isn't a trick." Lila reached across the table, touching her hand. "It's been 7 years. You're exhausted. You want closure. Your mind will give it to you, in whatever form it can. But look at this logically. Why would he be in Portugal? Why not call you? Why vanish without a trace? She had a point. Of course she did. Lila always had a point. She was the one who handled the logistics when Lucas went missing. She helped Ellison fill out reports, talk to the insurance adjusters, research trauma counselors. She was her anchor. But anchors, sometimes, keep you from moving. Ellison didn't argue. She just nodded and smiled politely. They changed the subject. They talked about a client project, then traffic, then the weather. But her mind never left that photo. That night, after the city went quiet, Ellison sat at her kitchen table with the lights low. The glow of her laptop lit her face. She opened the photo again. Something had shifted inside her, and she didn't know how to name it. Not hope. That word was too fragile. Not fear. Not yet. It was movement. 7 years of stillness, emotional inertia, polite grief, boxes ticked, and pain filed away. But this was different. Her pulse was alive again. Her thoughts didn't feel heavy. She opened a browser tab and typed in, flights from Seattle to Lisbon. The prices didn't matter. The dates didn't matter. She chose the earliest flight with a short enough layover to make it feel urgent, but long enough that she could talk herself out of it if she had to. But she wouldn't. Her finger hovered over the confirm booking button. Her heart beat once hard. Then again. Click. Done. The air felt different. Not just the temperature, though it was warmer, saltier, sun-slicked in a way that reminded Ellison her skin had forgotten what summer really felt like. But something else. Something slower. More fluid. Like time was unspooling differently here. Cascais. The old fishing town clung to the edge of Portugal like a forgotten jewel. Pale stone streets, crumbling walls draped in bougainvillea, and that smell. Sea salt, roasted almonds, espresso. The kind of place that made people pause in the middle of walking just to close their eyes. Ellison stepped out of the taxi and onto the cobbled square, the wheels of her suitcase catching in the uneven stones. The driver wished her luck in Portuguese and disappeared with a friendly wave. She just stood there for a moment, blinking. There was the house from the blog, the whitewashed facade, soft turquoise shutters, clay pots bursting with geraniums, exactly as it had looked in the photo. And just beyond it, a small cafe, 3 tables, faded umbrellas. She pulled out her phone and opened the screenshot again. The same patio, the same chairs, the same angle of sun. No man this time. The table in the corner sat empty, a single glass reflecting the light. She walked slowly, like stepping through a dream she hadn't quite earned. The streets nearby twisted like ribbons, narrow and dappled with shade. Her sandals echoed against the stones. Locals leaned in doorways, speaking softly, their voices rich and warm. She followed the map she had memorized. But more than that, she followed instinct. Her body moved as if pulled by something quieter than logic, a thread tied to her ribs. She passed a ceramic shop, then a bookstore with hand-lettered signs, then turned into a quiet alley framed in ivy. That's when she heard it. Laughter. A boy's, light and clear. A bark followed. Sharp, excitable, high-pitched. She turned a corner and almost collided with them. A boy no older than 9 was tugging at a leash. The small terrier on the other end was wagging furiously, front paws off the ground, sniffing at Ellison's suitcase. "Oh, sorry," she laughed, stepping back. The boy grinned. "Sophia, leave her alone." The dog obeyed instantly, tail still going. Ellison crouched slightly. "She's beautiful. She's trouble," he said proudly. Then, his eyes narrowed just a little. Thoughtfully, not rudely. "Are you Senora Ray?" She blinked. "What did you say?" He shrugged, petting Sophia's head. "The man who lives near the cafe. Sometimes he talks about Senora Ray. You look like what he said." Ellison froze. Her pulse skipped. "What's his name?" she asked carefully. The boy shrugged. "Don't know. Just the man with the books." She opened her mouth to say something. Anything. But he was already turning, dragged along by the dog and some urgent childhood mission. "Bye," he called over his shoulder. She couldn't move for a moment. Senora Ray. Her maiden name. A name Lucas used to say like a joke. All formality and love. She hadn't heard it in years. The next morning broke slow and silver. Ellison stood at the window of her rented studio apartment, overlooking a narrow stone street, still half asleep. Below, A cafe owner swept breadcrumbs from the tiles. Somewhere in the distance, church bells tolled once, low and deliberate. She hadn't slept. Not really. She'd laid still for hours, mind racing through names, gestures, years, trying to stitch the past to the impossible present. Her heart kept pulling toward one truth. Her head begged her to wait, to make sure. But logic was becoming a whisper. She sipped bitter coffee and looked through the lens of her camera again. The only thing that felt safe to use, like a shield she could hide behind. The man on the balcony had returned. Third floor. Same spot. A faded striped awning cast a soft pattern across his face. He wore thin-rimmed glasses, pushed up the bridge of his nose with the same absent motion Lucas always made. He sat still, a book open in his hands, one leg crossed over the other. His hair was shorter now, touched with gray, beard slightly fuller. He looked older, yes, 7 years older, but he also looked exactly the same. Ellison adjusted the zoom, holding her breath. She clicked the shutter. Click, click, click. His eyes never lifted. She examined the photos later on her laptop. His profile, the slight curve of his mouth, the way he turned a page with the side of his index finger. It was all so achingly familiar. But a voice inside whispered, people change. Grief invents faces. Memory lies. Still, she knew him. Knew him the way you know the smell of your own home, even blindfolded. Not just the physical features, but the rhythm of him. She closed the screen and rubbed her eyes. Doubt pressed in like fog. What if she was wrong? What if she walked up to him and shattered herself against a stranger? But what if she didn't? What if she flew across the world, stood in the same city as the man she'd once loved, and turned away? She couldn't do that. At 4:47 a.m., she stood barefoot on the cool tile floor, staring at the ceiling fan as it whirred a quiet circle above her. By 5:02, she was dressed. Not in something dramatic. No trench coats, or red lipstick, or carefully staged entrances. Just jeans, a linen shirt, and that quiet heartbeat in her throat. She tucked the photo into her bag, the one of them together at Lake Chelan. Not for proof, but as a reminder. She hadn't made this up. Outside, the sky was lightening. Seagulls cried over the rooftops. She walked toward the building with the striped awning, pulse quickening with each step. The cafe below was still closed, metal shutter drawn halfway down. She waited on the corner, pretending to examine her phone. The balcony was empty now, but she would return. Today, tomorrow, however long it took. The third morning, he came down at 8:11 a.m. Ellison had been waiting since 7, sitting at the far end of the cafe terrace, a book open in front of her, but unread, her coffee long cold. She almost missed him. He stepped out of the stairwell with a quiet gait, like someone used to solitude. A canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Glasses. Blue shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbow. Exactly as he'd looked in the photo. Exactly as she remembered him. Her heart didn't just pound. It rose, pushing against her ribs like it was trying to climb out. She stood slowly. Her knees felt unsteady, but she moved forward without thinking. Instinct overruled reason. He was just about to pass by her table when she stepped into his path. Lucas. He stopped, looked at her, not startled, just politely confused. His eyes scanned her face, searching for context. Recognition. Nothing. I'm sorry, he said, his voice calm, distant. Do I know you? The voice, it was him. The same quiet cadence. The same gravel-tinged softness. Her breath caught. It's me, she said. Ellison. He tilted his head slightly. I think you have me mistaken for someone else. She blinked. No, I don't. You're Lucas Gray. You disappeared 7 years ago. You went missing in Washington State. On Lake Chelan. He gave a soft, awkward smile. My name is Alex. Alex Moreau. Moreau. He said it with a subtle French inflection, like he'd practiced it. She stared at him, unable to speak. Alex. No. This wasn't just someone who resembled Lucas. This was Lucas, down to the scar on his wrist from when he dropped a glass in their kitchen. It peeked from beneath his shirt cuff, unmistakable. He shifted his weight, glancing toward the cafe. Are you okay? No, she said, too quickly. I'm not. I flew here because I saw your photo on a blog. You were sitting right there, at that table. And now you're here, and you're telling me you don't know who I am. He took a slow step back. Not hostile, just careful. Measured. I'm sorry, he said again, quieter now. I hope you find who you're looking for. Then he turned and walked away. The name Alex Moreau lived lightly in Cascais, just a whisper beneath the daily hum of waves and footsteps and espresso machines. But it was there. Ellison spent the next 2 days listening for it. Not forcing, just listening. She started with the grocer on the corner, an older man with silver hair and a habit of humming Fado under his breath as he stacked tomatoes. Ah, Senor Moreau, he said when she asked, nodding thoughtfully. Quiet man. Always buys sardines. Reads a lot. Never in a rush. Has he lived here long? The grocer scratched his chin. 6 years, maybe 7. Time blurs, senora. But yes, around then. She thanked him, bought olives she didn't want, and moved on. Next, the florist. Then the woman who ran the bookstore with a closed sign that was never flipped. All said the same. Mr. Alex stopped. Polite. Private. A man who lived alone in the apartment above the cafe. Never had visitors. Never caused trouble. Ellison noted the pattern. Same words. Same rhythm. A rehearsed understanding among neighbors. Kind but cautious. As if they respected the invisible wall he'd built. Still, something wasn't right. 6 years, they said. But Lucas had gone missing 7 years ago. And he didn't just arrive here. Someone that injured, if it was him, would have needed help, paperwork, maybe even medical attention. So how did he get from the cold waters of a Washington lake to a quiet life in coastal Portugal? With a new name? That night, Ellison sat at her desk, surrounded by pages and screenshots. She dug into every public record she could find online. She searched immigration archives, hospital registries, and old blog posts from the area. There was no record of an Alex Moreau entering Portugal 7 years ago. Not under that name. Not with his face. No visa. No residency approval from that year. She narrowed her search to Lisbon, then to Cascais. She found a local government bulletin listing residency grants. In 2017, there was one approved for an Alex Moreau, sponsored by a private foundation. The name was generic. Untraceable. Her breath caught. A man with no known past, granted legal identity through a foundation? She clicked deeper into forums, fishing for local news archives, charity mentions, anything. At 2:17 a.m., she found a newspaper clipping, faded and translated, about an anonymous man found wandering along the Roca Cliffs in late 2016. Middle-aged, disoriented, nonverbal, possibly a head injury, temporarily admitted to private clinic under observation. No name, no photos, but the timing fit. The location made sense. She zoomed in on the image that accompanied the article, a blurry photo of the cliffs and the ambulance. No faces, just 2 figures in shadow, one sitting on a stretcher, the other blurred. Her skin prickled. Lucas? She shut the laptop and pressed her fingers to her forehead. Someone had helped him vanish. Or helped him start over. She didn't plan to speak to the woman. Not at first. But there was something about her. The way she sat every morning on the shaded bench beside the chapel steps, hands folded neatly over a cane, eyes steady on the sea, like she'd been watching it longer than anyone else. On Ellison's 5th day in Cascais, their paths finally crossed. The woman looked up as Ellison passed, gave a faint nod, then turned her gaze back toward the horizon. Ellison hesitated. She sat beside her. They stayed quiet at first, listening to the distant gulls and the lap of water against stone. A breeze pulled at the hem of Ellison's linen blouse. Then, gently, "You come for him," the woman said. Ellison turned sharply. "I what?" The woman didn't smile. She only nodded again. "You're the one he dreams about." Ellison's chest tightened. "You know him?" she asked softly. The woman gave a small shrug, slow and weighty. "No one really knows him. Not even himself." Ellison's breath caught in her throat. 6 years ago, the woman went on, he was brought here by someone. A younger man. Didn't speak much. His arms had cuts, not fresh, but healing. I was like someone who'd fallen from a great height and was still falling. Ellison swallowed hard. What else? He didn't talk. For weeks. Sat there. She gestured toward the far bench near the seawall. Just stared. Wouldn't touch the water. Flinched if it got near. Lucas. It had to be. And his name. Ellison asked. He didn't give one. Just numbers. Nonsense. He barely remembered how to eat. The boy who brought him, French, I think, arranged for a doctor. Quiet people. Private clinic up the hill. He stayed there a long time. Ellison's thoughts spiraled. The foundation. The private sponsorship. The missing visa records. He was injured, she asked. The woman nodded. Inside. You can heal broken bones. But the mind. She tapped her temple. No surgeon knows how to find what gets lost in there. Silence stretched between them. He started speaking again after some months, the woman added. New words. A new name. But never the sea. Never the lake. Ellison blinked. He said lake. No, the woman said. But I saw it in his eyes when the tide came close. Tears pressed behind Ellison's eyes, hot and unbidden. All this time, he hadn't left her. He'd been taken by something silent, invisible, a trauma that lived behind the eyes, curling like smoke. And someone had found him, sheltered him, given him a name, a history not his own, to protect him or to keep him hidden. The woman stood slowly. If you're the one from his dreams, she said, then you must choose. Do you wake him or let him sleep? Ellison remained on the bench long after the woman disappeared down the steps. She had come to Cascais for answers, but now she had something else. A beginning. The precinct smelled like stale coffee and sun-faded paper. Ellison sat in a hard plastic chair across from a disinterested officer who typed with 2 fingers and didn't once look her in the eye. I'm not saying he's dangerous, she said carefully. I'm saying he might be someone else, someone who was reported missing. In the U.S. 7 years ago. The officer's fingers paused mid-keystroke. Then, but he lives here legally. There's no report, no complaint. You said he claims he's Alex Morrow? Yes, but if he has identification, and he isn't asking for help, there's not much we can do. Ellison clenched her jaw. Even if he might be someone who disappeared under traumatic circumstances. Senora, he said, finally meeting her gaze, a man choosing a quiet life in Portugal isn't a crime. He returned to his keyboard, already done with the conversation. Ellison left without slamming the door. Barely. Outside, the sun glared too brightly. She stood in the street, blinking, her hands trembling with helplessness. If the police wouldn't help, then she would do what she'd done for the last week. Follow the pieces herself. She returned to her apartment and spread out everything she had. The foundation name, the year, the mention of a clinic from the old woman, the newspaper clipping. She began calling. One by one, she phoned private clinics in the Lisbon and Cascais region, pretending to be a journalist working on a story about long-term memory loss recovery. Most were polite, some curt, none helpful, until the 7th call. A woman answered in soft, cautious Portuguese. When Ellison asked about 2016, about a man brought in without documentation, disoriented, found on the cliffs, the line went quiet. Then, almost too softly, who told you about him? Ellison's pulse jumped. I can't say, but I think I know who he is. He was my husband. Silence again. Then the woman exhaled. We were instructed not to ask questions. He was referred by a private benefactor. The only name on file was Alex Sim. No last name. No legal one. Only initials. He stayed for 3 months. Didn't speak for most of it. Terrified of water. Nightmares often. Head trauma. Likely untreated. No visible wounds when he arrived. Ellison sat down. Hard. The phone pressed to her cheek. Do you know who brought him in? She asked. The woman hesitated. No. Only that the paperwork came from a French address. A non-profit organization that doesn't seem to exist anymore. Is there anything else? Ellison whispered. A pause. Then, he carried something. A watch. Wouldn't let us take it. Slept with it. Clutched it during the night. Ellison closed her eyes. It was his. She knew it. The same cracked-face watch that once sat in a drawer beside their bed. The one she'd searched for after the accident, assuming it had sunk with him. It hadn't. It had traveled oceans. Just like him. After she ended the call, Ellison sat in silence. The facts no longer whispered. They screamed. Lucas hadn't just survived it. Someone had helped him forget. But why? And who would go so far to erase a man from his own life? The second time she went to the precinct, they didn't even offer her a seat. You were already told, the sergeant said flatly, arms crossed over his chest. Unless the man files a missing persons correction himself, there is nothing to investigate. He has legal ID. He has a residence. This is not a crime. Ellison stared at him. So if someone takes a person, erases his identity, and drops him into another country, you do nothing? The officer narrowed his eyes. Are you accusing someone of abduction? She didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Not with proof. Just memory. Instinct. Photographs. Fragments. He turned away, already signaling the end of the conversation. Ellison stepped out into the street, heart pounding with quiet fury. The system didn't want loose ends. Lucas, or Alex, wasn't missing anymore. On paper, he'd been found, wrapped in a neat file, legally living under another name. A life rebuilt, so long as no one asked why. But she would keep asking, because she hadn't come this far to be shut down by polite bureaucracy. She returned to the private clinic's name. It had changed hands since 2019, now rebranded and operating under a new board. But one archive page on a health directory still listed 2 former staff members. She called both numbers. One was disconnected. The second rang 6 times before someone picked up. Hola. Hi. Ellison said. I'm looking for someone who worked at the Clínica do Mar around 2016. Is this Luis Carvalho? A pause. Yes. Who is this? I'm sorry to disturb you. My name is Ellison Gray. I think you treated a man. He arrived in 2016, brought in without documents, found on the cliffs. He couldn't speak. He had memory loss. Silence. Then, I remember. Her throat tightened. You do? Yes. Only one patient like that. He stayed a long time. He wasn't violent, but afraid of everything, especially mirrors, water, loud sounds. Her breath caught. Did he say anything? Did he ever mention a name? Luis hesitated. I don't think he knew his name. At first, he just repeated phrases. Parts of dreams, maybe. Then one day, during a session, he said something odd, over and over. What was it? She asked. The lake didn't take me. Her hand flew to her mouth. He remembered. Somewhere, deep inside, something in him remembered the truth, even if no one had believed him. Do you know who brought him in? She asked softly. Luis exhaled. A man. Young, maybe early 30s. Very calm. Too calm. Had all the paperwork prepared. Spoke with a French accent. Said the patient had no family. That he was escaping trauma. We weren't allowed to ask questions. Would you recognize him? No. But the signature on the transfer form wasn't his. It was a woman's. Different handwriting. Someone else funded it. Ellison scribbled it down. There were layers. Faces behind faces. A cover story that ran deeper than coincidence. She thanked Luis, hung up, and sat in silence. They had built a life around his forgetting. A system designed to erase, to hide. But something in Lucas had survived the tide. And now she would not stop until he remembered who he was. She waited until morning. Not out of patience, but necessity. Her hands trembled too much to hold the photograph. Her thoughts spiraled too fast to form sentences. All night, Ellison sat in the dark, listening to the distant hush of the Atlantic and the slow ticking of the clock in the kitchen. At dawn, she dressed without thinking. Jeans, white shirt, the same soft sweater he used to borrow when he got cold. She tucked the photo into the inside pocket of her bag. Then the cassette. It was old, a recording they'd made on their 3rd anniversary. Lucas had bought a vintage recorder at a flea market and insisted they document their brilliance over a bottle of wine. Most of it was laughter, background clinking of glasses, unfinished stories. But his voice was there, unmistakable. By 8 a.m., she stood once more in front of the cafe. He came out a few minutes later. Same careful pace, same routine, a newspaper tucked under one arm, sunglasses, his quiet shape folding into the sunlight like he belonged to it. She stepped directly into his path. This time he paused, not startled, just still. Alex, she said calmly. He looked at her. No retreat, no annoyance, but not recognition either. Just that same patient confusion. She reached in her bag and pulled out the photograph, held it out with both hands. It was the 2 of them, standing on the dock at Lake Chelan 7 summers ago, her arms around his neck, his chin resting lightly on her shoulder. Both of them squinting into the sun, smiling without restraint. He stared at it. The shift was almost imperceptible, a tiny exhale, as if his body remembered something before his mind caught up. I don't, he began. But she wasn't finished. She took out the recorder. Press play. Crackling. Then her voice, laughing. Okay, future us. You're listening to this because you forgot how ridiculous we are. And then his voice, younger, warmer, teasing. I never forget. You're the forgetful one. I remember everything. Especially the way you look when you pretend not to cry at movies. The air between them thickened. He blinked. His lips parted slightly. Another breath. Another pause. His eyes dropped back to the photo. Then to her. And then, like a wave pulling back before it crashes, his face changed. Just a flicker. A flash behind the eyes. His hand rose to his temple. Fingers trembled. He whispered. That voice. Tears welled up in his eyes without permission. He staggered back a half step, catching the edge of the cafe table. Ellison reached out, steadying him. You used to say I wore the world like armor, she said, her own voice shaking. But you were the one who taught me how to take it off. His eyes met hers. Full. Raw. Afraid. I dreamed this, he said hoarsely. I thought it was just a dream. It wasn't. And then, a single tear slid down his cheek. Not memory. Not yet. But something breaking open. Something returning. They sat in silence for a long time after that. Not the awkward kind, but the sacred kind. The kind that stretches between two people when something delicate has cracked open, and neither wants to speak too soon, for fear the moment might vanish. Lucas, no, Alex, stared down at the photograph between them. His fingers hovered above it, almost afraid to touch. His voice was barely audible. I see her in dreams, he said. Sometimes on a dock. Sometimes just in light. I never see her face. But I always know it's her. Ellison didn't speak. She let him go on, gently, like a man feeling his way through fog. There's always water. Always silence. Sometimes it pulls me under. Sometimes it just watches me. And I wake up with my hands clenched. I wake up whispering a name I don't understand. He looked at her, eyes shining. It's your name, isn't it? She nodded once, slowly. Ellison. He exhaled, like her name alone held the weight of everything he'd forgotten. They took a train later that day to the edge of Lisbon, where the old clinic once stood. It had changed names, faces, signage, but the receptionist remembered the file. Berlida, a kind nurse who seemed too young to have been there in 2016, helped them find someone from the old staff, a retired administrator named Ramos, who agreed to meet them in the back garden, away from ears and eyes. Ramos was cautious, but not cruel. He looked at Lucas for a long moment before speaking. You were admitted under the name Alex M., with a referral and funding from an outside source. You had no ID, no memory, and your accent was unclear. But you had something else. He reached into a faded manila folder and pulled out a single page, yellowed at the edges, but legible. It was a copy of a death certificate. Lucas leaned forward, reading the name at the top. Lucas Raymond Gray. Born 1985. Declared dead. August 14th, 2016. Cause, presumed drowning. Signed by a coroner in Washington State. Lucas blinked. That's me. Ramos nodded gravely. You were buried, at least on paper. The man who funded your treatment claimed he was your cousin. Said he needed to shield you from further trauma. He provided the necessary documents, but we had no way of verifying anything. The passport, the medical transfer, even the psychiatric evaluations, they all looked legitimate. Ellison leaned closer. Do you remember who signed it? Who gave you the name Alex? Ramos shook his head. Just a woman's signature. We never saw her, but she had power. Enough to make your entire past disappear. Lucas sat very still, as if something deep inside him had just dropped into place. So I was gone, he whispered. Erased. No, Ellison said softly, laying her hand on his. You were stolen. The wheels touched down at SeaTac Airport with a soft jolt that echoed somewhere deep in Ellison's chest. She looked across the aisle at him, at Lucas, sitting quietly by the window, hands folded in his lap. He hadn't said much during the flight. Not out of fear. Not anymore. Just processing. Since Lisbon, things had shifted. Memories hadn't come back all at once. No great cinematic flood. But in fragments. A favorite song. The smell of cinnamon. The way he used to stack books sideways instead of upright. Sometimes he would pause mid-sentence and say, "Wait, I think I remember that," and smile in this quiet, astonished way, like finding pieces of himself buried in his own voice. They moved through customs like shadows. No red flags, no questions. The name on his temporary passport matched his new legal identity, Alex Moreau. But not for long. Outside the terminal, the air was cool and sharp. Washington gray, with clouds pressed low over the skyline like wool. Ellison scanned the arrivals area, heart hammering, until she saw him. "David," she called. Her brother turned and froze. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, landing in a silent splash at his feet. He didn't even notice. "Ellie." His voice cracked. Lucas stepped beside her. He didn't smile, just waited gently. David stared at him for a full 10 seconds, jaw tight, shoulders squared, as if unsure whether to hug him or hit him. Then, "No way. No, this isn't possible." Lucas nodded slowly. "I know. You died." David's voice rose, but broke halfway. "I went to your funeral. I scattered your ashes." Ellison stepped forward, laying a hand on his arm. "You scattered someone's ashes. Not his." David's eyes filled. "Is it really you?" Lucas didn't answer with words. He only held out his hand, palm up, and said softly, "Your fishing knife. You left it in my tackle box after the bachelor trip. You said I owed you a new one when it rusted." David choked out a laugh through the tears, then crushed him in a hug that collapsed them both slightly. For the first time in years, the three of them stood in the same place, breathing the same air. Real. Later, they sat around Ellison's kitchen table, the one Lucas had built a decade ago, with papers, folders, and sticky notes spread out like puzzle pieces. An attorney friend of David's guided them through the process. Step 1. Reissue the birth certificate. Step 2. Void the death declaration. Step 3. Begin the slow, careful climb toward legal re-identification. It would take months, but they would do it. Together. Some nights, Lucas still woke in the dark, disoriented, heart pounding, reaching for something. But now, Ellison was there. Sometimes beside him, sometimes just in the next room. She never pressed, never demanded. She simply lived with him, moment by moment, gently reintroducing him to his own life. One photo at a time. One smell. One street. One morning with coffee on the porch, hands touching without words. It was not a return to what was. It was the slow, careful birth of what would be. And that, Ellison thought, was more than enough.